Child, sit close, because this story is not easy for me to tell. My bones may be weak, and my hair white, but my memory is sharp, sharper than any knife in my kitchen drawer. And sometimes, the things you remember cut deeper than any blade ever could. It began on a summer evening, warm and golden, when the fireflies had just begun to dance in the air. I had walked slowly, carefully, through the gate into my son's backyard. I carried a pie, still warm, the crust golden, the smell of apples and cinnamon rising like a blessing. I thought I was bringing joy. I thought I was bringing family together. But then I stopped. Because I heard it. His voice. My son's voice. My only boy, Tom. The same boy I had carried 9 months beneath my heart, the boy I had worked my fingers raw to raise. He was talking, low, but clear enough. And he said, "Why is she even still alive?" The pie slipped in my hands. My knees weakened. The laughter from the others, his wife, maybe a neighbor, maybe even his children, floated in the air after those words. They laughed like it was a joke, but there are some words you cannot joke with. Some words are heavier than stones, and when they hit you, they break things you thought could never break. Therefore, I did not move right away. I stood in the shadows by the lilac bush, listening. The voices carried. She just sits there, always looking at us. I mean, she's old. What's she even holding on for? Tom said again. Sarah, his wife, let out a soft laugh, one she thought was sweet. Don't say that, Tom. But I know what you mean. And then, as if to cut me deeper, one of my grandchildren, my own flesh and blood, giggled too. I felt the evening air grow cold around me though the sky was painted in fire. My heart pounded, but it was not from fear. It was from something heavier, betrayal. But I steadied myself. I placed the pie on the wooden bench by the path, and I whispered, "Not tonight. Not this time." And then I walked away before they could see me, before they could turn those words into smiles and pretend they meant nothing. Child, do you understand how it feels to be erased by the very people you gave your life for? It is like standing in your own house and hearing strangers talk about you, as if you are already gone. It is like breathing and knowing they wish you wouldn't. Therefore, when I got back home to this little place, this small traditional home where I sit with you now, I lit a single candle, and I sat at the table. My hands shook, not from age, but from the storm inside. I thought of all I had endured, of the nights I scrubbed floors with bleeding hands so Tom could go to school in clean clothes, of the mornings I skipped meals so he could eat, of the winters I wore thin coats while saving money for his football cleats. And now, after everything, he asked why I was still alive. But hear me, child, that night was not an ending. That night was the beginning. Because pain, if you carry it long enough, turns into strength. And betrayal, if you face it head on, can turn into power. Therefore, I decided. If my son and his wife and even my grandchildren could not see my worth, then I would make them. Not with anger that breaks, but with a truth so sharp and a justice so clean that they would never forget the lesson. I tell you this so you understand, silence has power, but so does action. And I, though old, still had action in me. So I wiped my tears, I blew out the candle, and I whispered to myself, they want to know why I am still alive. They will find out. And, child, that was the night the story truly began. Child, lean closer. Because if you only hear the ending of my story without the beginning, you may think your grandmother is bitter. But no, I am not bitter. I am bruised, yes. I am scarred, yes. But scars are proof of survival, not weakness. Therefore, let me take you back, many years ago, long before your father's words cut me open. When I was a young woman, life was not gentle with me. I married your grandfather when I was just 18. He was tall, strong, and full of dreams. But dreams do not always put food on the table. And therefore, I worked. I washed clothes for neighbors. I cooked in other people's kitchens. I cleaned their homes until my back screamed and my hands cracked. But I did not complain, because in those days, I believed in sacrifice. And when your father was born, I felt as if the whole world had been placed in my arms. I looked at him, and I said to myself, I will give this child everything, even if it costs me my life. And so, child, it did. Your grandfather, he was a kind man at first. But kindness can turn brittle when money is short. He began to drink. At first, it was on weekends, but then it was on weekdays too. And when the bottle was empty, his hands grew heavy, and sometimes, I was the one who bore the weight of his anger. But I never let Tom see. I never let him know his father could be cruel. I would hide the bruises beneath long sleeves. I would smile, and I would tell him his daddy loved him. Because a child deserves hope, even when the truth is too heavy. Therefore, I carried both the love and the pain. But then one night, everything changed. Your grandfather never came home. They found his truck by the river, engine still running, but the man himself, gone. Some said he drowned, others said he walked away and never came back. All I knew was that I was alone with a boy to raise and no money to my name. Child, do you know what it feels like to stand in front of a cupboard and see nothing but dust? I do. I would boil water and call it soup, just so Tom could believe we were eating something. I sold the little jewelry I had, piece by piece, just to buy him school books. And sometimes, when I could not find enough work, I would stitch old rags into clothes for him, sewing by candlelight, my fingers bleeding on the needle. But I never let him see my despair. I told myself, one day, he will grow, and he will understand. One day, he will know his mother's sacrifices. And therefore, I pushed through. When Tom was in high school, he wanted to play football. I had no money for gear, but I worked double shifts at the diner, scrubbing greasy floors until midnight, so I could buy him those cleats. And when he won his first game, he ran across the field, smiling, and hugged me in front of everyone. In that moment, child, every blister, every tear, every ache felt worth it. But as he grew older, he changed. The world whispered in his ear that money was power, that pride was more important than gratitude. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped thanking me. And slowly, the boy who once hugged me in front of the crowd became a man who looked at me like I was a burden. Therefore, when I heard him say in that backyard, "Why is she even still alive?" it did not come from nowhere. It was the final stone on a pile that had been growing for years. But do not think I tell you this to ask for pity. No. I tell you this so you understand the full truth. Love is powerful, but ungratefulness can kill it. And I had given my son my youth, my health, my very soul. Yet in return, he gave me silence, distance, and finally, those cruel words. Therefore, I began to see my life differently. That night, after leaving the pie on his bench, I sat in this very chair and I thought, if I can survive a husband's fists, if I can survive hunger, if I can raise a boy from nothing, then surely I can survive this pain too. But I will not let it pass quietly. Because silence may protect your heart for a while, but it does not change the truth. And the truth was that my son had forgotten me. Therefore, I knew I had to remind him. Not by begging. Not by crying. But by showing him that the woman he dismissed as worthless still had power, still had strength, and still had the ability to turn the table in ways he could never expect. Child, I see the worry in your eyes, but do not fear. What I planned was not born from hatred. It was born from justice. Sometimes, the only way to teach those who take you for granted is to let them feel what life is like without your giving hand. Therefore, I began to prepare. I gathered the old savings I had hidden away for years. I spoke to people I once helped, people who still remembered the kindness I gave when I had nothing. And I began to weave a plan not only to protect myself, but to show my son that the woman he thought was still alive for nothing, was about to change everything. And child, that is where the real storm began. Child, you have listened with patience, and now I must tell you the ending of my story. And believe me, endings are not always soft, not always tender. Sometimes, they are sharp, because life demands it. Therefore, listen carefully, for this is where my pain became my strength. After that night in the backyard, I did not return to my son's house. I sat in this chair, staring at the walls of my small home, and I thought about every year I had given away, the years of hunger, the years of sacrifice, the years of love that went unnoticed. And I asked myself, what do I owe him now? Nothing. But I did not want to vanish quietly. No, child. I wanted him to remember me not as a shadow in the corner, but as the fire he underestimated. Therefore, I took action. You know the small trunk I keep beneath my bed. Inside it were papers. Deeds. Proof of the land your grandfather once left, land no one knew still belonged to me. I had kept it quiet all these years, afraid people would take it from me. But now, I realized that silence had preserved my power. That land, child, had grown valuable. Developers wanted it. And they were willing to pay. So, I sold it. And with the money, I did something unexpected. I bought myself a new little house. Not grand, not shining, but strong and warm, with a roof that does not leak and walls that do not whisper loneliness. I filled it with the smell of fresh bread, with curtains that catch the morning sun. I made a home, a real home, not for him, but for me. And then, child, the whispers began. My son heard. He came to me one afternoon, his face red with surprise, his voice trembling with forced sweetness. He said, Mom, why didn't you tell me about this land? We could have worked together. You should have trusted me. But I looked at him, steady as stone, and I said, you asked why I was still alive. Now you know. I lived to show you that the woman you cast aside could stand taller than the man who tried to bury her. His mouth fell open, but no words came. He had no excuse, no defense. Therefore, I laid it bare. I gave you my youth, my strength, my sleepless nights. And when I grew old, you gave me cruelty. So do not come here with false kindness now that you see what I still hold. Go home. Remember your words. Remember that I am alive, not for you, but for myself. Child, the silence that followed was heavier than any blow I had ever taken in my life. My son lowered his head. For once, he had to face the truth. And when he left, I did not cry. No, I sat in my chair, my heart steady. Because revenge, child, does not always mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes, revenge is living well in front of those who prayed for your weakness. Sometimes, revenge is silence that echoes louder than words. But I must also leave you with a lesson. Do not grow into the kind of person who forgets the hands that fed you, the arms that held you, the heart that bled for you. Because life is a circle. What you give, it returns. What you deny, it takes away. Therefore, my revenge was not only for me. It was a warning for him, and for you. Love your people while they are alive. Honor them before it is too late. Because one day, child, you may sit where I sit, with stories of sacrifice behind you and silence in front of you. And when that day comes, I pray your children's voices will not sound like knives in your back. I pray their words will be gentle, filled with gratitude, not cruelty. So remember this story. Hold it tight. Because I lived through fire, so you would not have to. And I found peace, even when the people I loved most tried to take it from me. Therefore, I survived. But more than that, I prevailed.